as we know, when it comes to landlords selling off, this is something that has triggered not only just this year, it's been going on for a few years now. And one of the biggest impacts that I've seen personally when I speak to landlords on a day-to-day basis, it has to be tied in to the implementation of Section 24. If you're not familiar with that, with the previous government, we had the then Chancellor, George Osborne, who came up with the brilliant idea of wanting to level up, these are his words, the playing field with homeowners and also when it comes to landlords and buy-to-let investors. So what he's done, he's removed the ability of landlords to be able to offset the mortgage interest as expenses. Now, this is a huge hit. What happened was there's a combination that made this really lethal. So Section 24, effectively what it means is that you are now being taxed on your turnover as opposed to profits. Now that was bad enough, but of course we entered into 2020s during the COVID period, and what we've had is mortgage go through the roof. And of course the combination of not being able to offset that and now suddenly those interest rates eating into your profits, and that has been a lethal combination, and a lot of landlords are struggling with that. 39% of landlords likely to exit the market in the next 5 years. 37% plan to reduce their portfolio in the next 12 months. Now, I've seen stats that's up to even 50% with other research carried out. Only 6% plan to expand, down from 18% in Q1 2022. It's important also to understand what type of landlords are doing what, because to simplify things, you do have landlords we consider to be professional landlords and have 5+ properties, and then you have those accidental landlords who have a couple of properties, and then you have those other landlords that not necessarily professional, but they're not necessarily accidental. They do want to be in the buy-to-let industry. So I'll give you an example. How do you end up being an accidental landlord? Well, it can be you've inherited a property. It could be that you were looking to upsize, weren't able to sell the property where you're living in at the moment because perhaps there's no equity on it, and that's not unusual here in London at least, and therefore went on to purchase that upsized property but kept this one, and now suddenly you've become a landlord. Divorce, so forth and so forth. You get my drift. 22% sold a property in the past year. That's a big number. That's almost a quarter of properties sold. And among landlords with 4+ buy-to-let mortgages, 31% sold a property, 11% made a purchase. Just 28% of sold properties stayed in the PRS. 67% were sold to owner-occupiers, including 31% to first-time buyers, suggests a significant reduction in rental stock. When the government says that these are the changes we're going to make, and yet it's not going to have an impact on the overall industry to landlords or to tenants, well, they're wrong. So when it comes to Section 24, we looked at some research done by Property Mark as to the impact it's had on landlords, which the government said it would be minimal. Well, it hasn't been minimal, and the proof is in the pudding, because a lot of landlords who have sold has been because at the back of that Section 24. In fact, we were reading some quotes from landlords from that research where we have landlords who said, hey, I was planning on buying a couple more properties within the next 24 months. Now I'm not. In fact, on the contrary, now I'm looking to reduce. Others saying, well, actually, I used to have enough money for my pension. Now I don't. So therefore, now I'm looking to sell. And so forth and so forth. The stories go on. What's the impact to tenants? Well, higher rent, poorer quality properties as well, as the landlords feel the pinch. 73% of landlords report strong tenant demand. 37% say very strong. 36% say quite strong. Average rental yield 6.3%, near 10-year high. There seems to be two things happening here. On one end, landlords feeling the pinch with all these combination of things, but then on the other side, we have landlords experiencing yields that they've not experienced for 10 years in that time frame. But it really depends on where you are. I know landlords who own 8-10 properties plus, they're actually expanding because they have seen their yields increase. So profitability remains steady despite rate increases. Concerns over renters' rights bill, growing compliance and energy efficiency requirements, fear of potential capital gain tax. So these are points that landlords continue to be concerned about. The renters' rights bill, and one of the biggest concerns from the Renters' Rights Bill is definitely going to be the abolishment of Section 21, the so-called no-fault eviction, the growing compliance and energy efficiency requirements, fear of potential capital gain tax increases, which that fear seems to have increased even more. I was reading an article a couple of days ago with regards to the non-dom new regulations and legislations and taxes and so forth. And there's a lot of talk about how is the government going to subsidize this. And there is a lot of talk that it's going to be based on capital gain tax increases, not only in property in general. Supply is falling while demand remains high. Rental stock reduction likely to lead to further rent increases. Here in London, at least, what we have seen is an increase around 30 to 35% since around about 2021. It started to slow down, not go down, but rental prices start to slow down here in London, at least. That being said, naturally, that is a slow period of time, especially for the capital. It's interesting as we head into spring, as we have done already, and go into summer, to see what that peak is going to be. It never fails, it always delivers, especially if you have properties that are close to these very prestigious universities, which is where you're going to maximize the most, which is international students. That being said, be cautious as to how much this is going to increase as we head into this summer, because we have seen a real slowdown of rental property. I'll give you an example. There's a property that I saw from one landlord achieved £3,150. This is a one-bed property in central London. At the moment, that property is on the market for £2,750 and it's not achieving even the £2,750. So again, time of the year has to be factored into this, because rental is cyclical. Lettings is cyclical, which is what brings even more of a concern to a lot of landlords with the Renters' Rights Bill, which is going to be removing the fixed term to just all rental properties moving into periodic. That does leave a lot of landlords vulnerable, because it means that a tenant can raise and say, hey, I'm going to vacate in December, which is really poor timing. You won't have any control over that anymore. When it comes to rentals outside of London, £1,300 per calendar month, record high, 0.6% up. London, £2,600. That is 14th consecutive record and up by 0.1%. So a couple of things to say from this. So outside of London, especially when it comes to the north, there weren't many cities that would achieve £1,000 per calendar month, especially up north. Now it's become the norm. Most of the major cities now easily have gone past £1,000. Number two, when it comes to London, it says the average is £2,600, almost 2,700 for sure, and this is outside of London. However, this shouldn't be confused with prime London. If you're looking at prime London, that number is going to be higher. You're looking at probably mid 3,000s or so in terms of average. And of course, I'm not talking about super prime. That is a different beast. Smallest Q1 rent increase since 2020. Okay, so again, this backs up what I've just shared with you. We're seeing a slowdown, not a come down in rental prices. Legislations, politicians, economy, inflation, there are several factors that influence rental prices. That being said, there's going to be a ceiling on affordability. There's only so much tenants can go on. There's only so much. Even those international tenants, students, or whether that be international professionals, they also are going to have a limit on that. And I've seen this especially with Asian and Middle Eastern international students. Before, the price was the price, they wouldn't blink and they would just pay. Right now, they are negotiating on rental prices, meaning that they are feeling also the pinch, something that I hadn't seen before. New rental listings up 11% year on year by March. Total rental stock up 18% year on year. Tenant inquiries down by 7%. First time buyer activity pulling demand from rental market. Average of 12 inquiries per rental, down from 16 in Q 2024. Still double Q1 2019 average 5 inquiries. Now, London 8 inquiries per property. Northwest 18 inquiries per property. 25% of rental listings see price reductions highest since 2018. Rent growth since 2020 plus 40%. So there you are. I mean, I put it at 35% since 2021. I'm glad to see I wasn't that far off. Wage growth since 2020 up by 31%. Stretched affordability, forcing more landlords to reduce asking prices. No major market shift yet, but broader implications expected. Ban on rent in advance could reduce tenant flexibility. But certainly we're a long way away from the crazy market we saw 2 years ago, whereby you would put a rental property on the market for a couple of hours and literally you will have 100 people wanted to view that property. And ultimately you'd have to switch off the marketing and deal with what you had there on hand and negotiate with probably around about 20 of those applicants to get landlords the best possible price. So it was definitely we're a long way away from that, and perhaps just coming very slowly to a more normal market.